Officer Travis Holden had been with the Richmond Police Department for 7 years when he made a traffic stop that would destroy his career and cost the city $15 million. He was 34 years old, experienced enough to understand the law he was sworn to uphold, but apparently convinced that his authority superseded anyone else's. One Thursday evening on Monument Avenue in Richmond's most affluent neighborhood, he saw a black man driving a Mercedes G-Wagon and decided that was probable cause. The man behind the wheel was Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Williams, a federal prosecutor with 19 years of experience, who just left a meeting at the U.S. Attorney's office. What Holden did next, refusing to explain the stop, escalating to a felony traffic stop without cause, and ignoring federal credentials presented 3 separate times, would become proof that even a Department of Justice badge can't protect you from an officer who's decided you're guilty of driving while black. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. A black man in his mid-40s, Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Williams, was driving home from work on a quiet Thursday evening at 6:38 p.m. His briefcase sat in the passenger seat beside him, federal case files visible inside. His Department of Justice credentials were in his suit jacket pocket. No traffic violation, no erratic driving, no crime. Just a federal prosecutor heading home after a 12-hour workday. But Officer Holden saw him through a lens so warped by assumptions about who belongs behind the wheel of a $150,000 vehicle that he couldn't imagine a black man as anything other than a suspect. Monument Avenue stretches through Richmond's historic West End, a tree-lined boulevard famous for its Confederate statues and multi-million-dollar mansions. Wide sidewalks, manicured lawns, European cars parked in circular driveways. The kind of neighborhood where old money lives quietly and newcomers are noticed immediately. The street itself is 4 lanes, divided by a grassy median dotted with monuments. Oak trees arch overhead, their branches forming a canopy that filters the evening light. It was 6:38 p.m. on a Thursday in late September. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the pavement. Rush hour traffic had thinned. The air was warm but cooling, that transitional moment between summer heat and fall crispness. A few joggers moved along the sidewalk. A woman walked her golden retriever past the Lee Monument. The kind of evening where nothing dramatic typically happens. The kind of place where people assume everyone belongs because everyone looks a certain way. Until someone doesn't. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Williams had been a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia for 19 years. 19 years building cases that required meticulous attention to detail, an encyclopedic knowledge of federal law, and the ability to stand before judges and juries and prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. He'd spent 12 years prosecuting white-collar crimes, securities fraud, money laundering, public corruption cases that dismantled criminal enterprises operating behind corporate facades. 7 years before that in violent crimes, prosecuting drug trafficking organizations, firearms violations, cases under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. He'd argued before the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals 6 times. He'd tried 47 federal cases to verdict, securing convictions in 44 of them. He'd worked with the FBI, DEA, ATF, and IRS Criminal Investigation Division. His colleagues called him surgical in his preparation. Defense attorneys called him relentless. Judges respected his command of case law and procedural rules. Williams had graduated from Howard University School of Law, where he'd served as editor of the Howard Law Journal and graduated magna cum laude. Before law school, he'd earned his undergraduate degree in political science from Morehouse College, graduating summa cum laude with departmental honors. After law school, he'd clerked for a federal district court judge in Maryland for 2 years, before joining the U.S. Attorney's Office. He'd received the Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service twice. He'd been appointed to the Virginia State Bar's Professional Responsibility Committee. He'd taught trial advocacy as an adjunct professor at University of Richmond School of Law for the past 5 years. At 46 years old, Marcus Williams was exactly where 2 decades of excellence had earned him a position. Senior trial attorney, trusted to handle the office's most complex prosecutions, mentoring younger prosecutors, and representing the United States government in federal court. He had a wife of 18 years, Dr. Kendra Williams, a cardiothoracic surgeon at VCU Medical Center. 2 children, Jasmine, 15, and Michael, 12. A modest but comfortable home in the Museum District. Season tickets to the Richmond Symphony. A 2023 Mercedes G-Wagon he'd purchased after his promotion to senior trial attorney. The life he'd built through relentless work, unwavering ethics, and a commitment to justice that left no room for shortcuts. That Thursday evening, Williams had left the U.S. Attorney's Office at 6:15 p.m. after a day that started at 7:30 a.m. with case review. He'd spent the morning preparing witness examinations for an upcoming bank fraud trial, the afternoon in a conference call with FBI agents coordinating a public corruption investigation, and the early evening reviewing grand jury materials for a securities fraud case. He'd skipped lunch. His head ached from staring at financial documents. He was looking forward to getting home, having dinner with his family, and maybe watching his son's basketball practice video. He wore a charcoal gray suit, white dress shirt, burgundy tie loosened at the collar. His DOJ credentials were in his inside jacket pocket where they always were. His service weapon, prosecutors in his division were authorized to carry, was locked in the gun safe bolted beneath the driver's seat, as Virginia law required during vehicle operation. He'd programmed his home address into the GPS out of habit, even though he'd driven this route hundreds of times. He looked like what he was, a professional man in his 40s heading home from work. He signaled every lane change. He maintained the speed limit. He stopped completely at every stop sign. He'd violated nothing, bothered no one, and given no officer any legitimate reason to pull him over. But to one officer patrolling Monument Avenue that evening, Marcus Williams driving a luxury SUV was enough. Officer Travis Holden was 34 years old. He'd been a patrol officer with the Richmond Police Department for 7 years, assigned to the Monument Avenue corridor for the past 4. He was efficient, assertive, and convinced that his instincts about suspicious behavior were rarely wrong. His supervisors described him as proactive, but sometimes overeager in his enforcement approach. His training evaluations noted a tendency to escalate situations unnecessarily and recommended additional de-escalation training. In 7 years, Officer Holden had compiled a record that should have triggered intensive remediation or reassignment. 14 complaints. 14. 9 of them involved allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, or unlawful detention of black motorists. 4 had been sustained, resulting in written reprimands, mandatory retraining, and 2-week suspensions without pay. The other 10 had been classified as unsubstantiated or unfounded, despite witness statements and dash camera footage that contradicted Holden's reports. Holden had a pattern. He targeted black drivers in affluent white neighborhoods, questioning their presence, demanding explanations for why they were there, treating legal activity as inherently suspicious. A black woman driving a Lexus through Windsor Farms in 2019, Holden stopped her for an alleged lane change violation, demanded proof of vehicle ownership, and detained her for 40 minutes while running her license through every database available, finding nothing. Complaint sustained. 2-week suspension. A black businessman in a BMW stopped on Grove Avenue in 2021. Holden claimed the temporary tag looked suspicious, pulled him over, conducted a search despite the driver's refusal to consent, found nothing illegal, then issued a warning for following too closely. Complaint unsubstantiated despite dash camera footage showing appropriate following distance. A black couple returning from dinner in the Fan District in 2022, Holden stopped them for failing to signal 100 feet before a turn, separated them to question them individually, asked where they'd gotten money for their Audi, and implied the car might be stolen. Complaint sustained. 1-week suspension and mandatory bias training. The pattern was documented, reviewed, and filed away. Each complaint was treated as an isolated incident. Each retraining was completed with no follow-up assessment. Each suspension was served with no change in assignment or supervision level. That Thursday evening at 6:35 p.m., Officer Holden was parked in a side street off Monument Avenue, conducting routine patrol. He saw a black Mercedes G-Wagon drive past. Black male driver. Expensive vehicle. Monument Avenue, a neighborhood Holden associated with old Virginia families and inherited wealth. In his mind, the equation didn't balance. A black man driving a vehicle worth more than Holden made in 2 years. In a neighborhood where Holden rarely saw black residents had to mean something. Drug dealer. Stolen vehicle. Someone who didn't belong. He didn't consider that the driver might own the vehicle legally. He didn't think about professionals, executives, doctors, lawyers. He just activated his lights and pulled into traffic behind the G-Wagon. Holden followed for 2 blocks before activating his siren. The G-Wagon signaled right and pulled over smoothly near the Jefferson Davis Monument. Professional. Compliant. Exactly what an innocent driver does. Holden approached on the driver's side, his right hand resting on his weapon. His mind had already constructed a narrative. Expensive car, black driver, evasive behavior to come. He was prepared for resistance, prepared for lies, prepared to prove his instincts correct. He reached the window. The driver had already lowered it. Hands visible on the steering wheel. Professional attire. Calm demeanor. None of it registered. Do you think officers with documented patterns of racial profiling should remain on patrol? Drop your answer below. Williams was reviewing his mental checklist for traffic stops. Hands visible, interior light on, polite compliance. When he saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror, his first thought was confusion. He hadn't been speeding. He'd signaled every turn. He'd stopped completely at the last intersection. His second thought was resignation. He'd been a black man in America long enough to know that sometimes the reason for the stop came after the stop, not before. He signaled right, pulled over smoothly, and turned on his interior light before the officer even exited the patrol car. He placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, visible through the window. He took a breath, stayed calm. This was a professional encounter. He was a federal prosecutor. He knew his rights. He knew how this should go. Through his side mirror, he watched the officer approach. White male, mid-30s, hand on his weapon, posture aggressive. Williams's stomach tightened. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was an officer who'd already decided something was wrong. The officer reached his window. Step out of the vehicle. Not a request. Command, no explanation, no greeting. Williams kept his voice calm and professional. I'm sorry, officer. What's the reason for the stop? License and registration. Now. Williams noted the officer's nameplate. Holden. He noted the badge number visible on the uniform shirt. He kept his hands on the wheel. Of course. Can you tell me why you pulled me over? Holden's jaw tightened. His hand moved closer to his weapon. I said license and registration. Don't make me ask again. Williams moved slowly, deliberately, one hand to his jacket pocket. I'm reaching for my wallet now, officer. I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Williams with the Eastern District of Virginia. I'm a federal prosecutor. My credentials are in my jacket pocket along with my driver's license. His fingers found the leather credential case. He pulled it out slowly, opened it to display the gold Department of Justice badge and his official identification card. He held it up where Holden could see it clearly. I don't care if you're the Attorney General. Out of the car, hands where I can see them. Williams blinked. He'd presented federal law enforcement credentials. Standard procedure required verification, a phone call, database check, basic respect for the authority those credentials represented. Officer Holden, I've identified myself as a federal prosecutor. I'm asking you again, what is the reason for this traffic stop? Holden's hand moved to his radio. 10-78, officer needs assistance. Monument and Davis. High-risk stop. Williams felt ice flood his veins. High-risk stop. That meant more units. That meant weapons drawn. That meant an officer had escalated a routine encounter into a felony traffic stop without justification. This is where bias becomes accusation. Officer Holden had stopped a black man driving a luxury vehicle. When that man presented federal credentials, Holden's bias didn't allow him to process the evidence. Federal prosecutors don't drive expensive cars. Black men in expensive cars are criminals. Therefore, the credentials must be fake. The calm professionalism must be an act. The expensive suit must be costume. Everything that contradicted his assumption was reinterpreted to confirm it. The Monument Avenue evening had transformed. Cars slowed as they passed. A jogger stopped on the sidewalk, phone out. A woman walking her dog stood frozen, watching. The scene was being documented. Williams heard sirens approaching. 2 more patrol cars pulled up within 90 seconds, blocking both lanes. 4 officers total now, all with hands on weapons. Driver, step out of the vehicle. Hands up. Move slowly. Williams complied. He opened the door with his left hand, keeping his right hand visible. He stepped out, turning to face the officers. 4 weapons pointed at him. He raised both hands. I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Williams. My credentials are in my hand. I'm a federal prosecutor. I was driving home from work. I have committed no traffic violation. I have provided identification. I'm asking what the legal basis is for this stop. His voice carried across the street. The witnesses heard every word. The phones recorded every second. Holden approached, grabbed Williams's wrist, and twisted it behind his back. The credential case fell to the pavement. You're being detained for investigation. Investigation of what? I've violated no law. I've shown you my federal credentials. You're required to verify them. Hands behind your back. The second officer picked up the credential case, examined it, and handed it to Holden. Holden glanced at it. The seal, the badge, the ID photo matching the man in handcuffs, and placed it on the hood of the patrol car without comment. Williams felt the metal cuffs close around his wrists. They were tight, deliberately uncomfortable. He didn't resist. He didn't pull away. He stood still and let it happen, because he understood what resisting would mean. 4 officers, 4 weapons, 1 black man. The math was fatal. Officer Holden, you are handcuffing a federal prosecutor without legal justification. My name is Marcus Williams. My badge number is 4721. I work in the Eastern District of Virginia U.S. Attorney's Office. These credentials are legitimate. You can verify them with a single phone call. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown. A man in running gear called out, "He showed you his badge. Why are you arresting him?" Another voice, "He's telling you he's a federal prosecutor. Check his ID." A woman with a phone held high. "I'm recording everything. This is illegal." Holden ignored them all. He walked Williams to the patrol car, placed a hand on his head, and guided him into the back seat. The door closed. Williams sat in the back of a police car in handcuffs, his credentials lying on a patrol car hood 15 feet away, watched by a growing crowd of witnesses who'd seen everything. Should officers be required to verify law enforcement credentials before making arrests? Let me know what you think. The backup units remained on scene. The officers conferred in a tight circle near Holden's patrol car. Williams could see them through the window. One officer picked up his credential case again, studying it more carefully. Another made a phone call. A third reviewed the dash camera footage. 12 minutes passed. Williams sat in silence, cataloging every detail. Times, statements, witnesses. He'd prosecuted civil rights cases. He'd reviewed thousands of hours of police misconduct evidence. He knew exactly what he was sitting in the middle of. A supervisor arrived, Captain Richard Morrison, a 28-year veteran with the Richmond Police Department who'd supervised Monument Avenue Patrol for the past 9 years and reviewed 3 of Holden's prior sustained complaints. He'd recommended additional training each time. He'd never recommended reassignment or termination. Morrison approached the patrol car, looked in at Williams. Professional attire, DOJ credentials on the hood, calm, demeanor, and his face went pale. He walked to Holden. "What do we have, Holden?" "Traffic stop. Suspicious vehicle. Driver refused to comply." Morrison glanced back at Williams, then at the G-Wagon with its Virginia plates clearly visible, and current registration sticker on the windshield. "Suspicious how?" "Expensive vehicle." Driver's behavior seemed evasive. Morrison picked up the credential case. He examined it under the streetlight. The Department of Justice seal embossed in gold. The badge with its unique serial number. The photo ID with its holographic security features. Everything about it screamed authentic federal law enforcement. "Did you verify these credentials?" He claimed they were real. "That's not what I asked." "Did you call the U.S. Attorney's Office to verify?" Holden hesitated. No, sir. Morrison's expression shifted to something between frustration and dread. He pulled out his phone and dialed. The call connected within seconds. This is Captain Morrison, Richmond PD. I need verification on a credential holder. Name, Marcus Williams. Badge number 4721, U.S. Attorney's Office, Eastern District of Virginia. The response came quickly. Morrison listened, his face darkening with each second. He ended the call and turned to Holden with barely contained fury. That man in your patrol car is Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Williams, Senior Trial Attorney, 19 years with DOJ, currently assigned to major fraud prosecution. His credentials are legitimate. He's exactly who he says he is. And you've handcuffed him without cause, in front of 24 witnesses. Holden's face drained of color. He was driving an expensive car in, I don't care if he was driving a Bentley. You stopped a federal prosecutor, ignored his credentials, and arrested him for being black in a nice car. Get him out of that vehicle right now. Morrison opened the patrol car door himself. Williams stepped out, still handcuffed. Sir, I apologize. This is unacceptable. We're removing the handcuffs immediately. The cuffs came off. Williams rubbed his wrists. Deep red marks circled both. The metal had cut into his skin during the 15 minutes he'd been detained. Morrison turned to Holden, his voice dropping to something cold and final. Badge, weapon, and radio. Administrative leave effective immediately. Captain, You detained a federal prosecutor after he identified himself and showed credentials. You called for backup and escalated to a felony stop without justification. You ignored basic verification procedures. Badge and weapon. Now, Holden removed his badge with shaking hands. He unclipped his service weapon and radio and handed them over. The other officers stood silent, watching. For the first time since the stop began, Holden seemed to understand what he'd done. Morrison turned back to Williams. Mr. Williams, on behalf of the Richmond Police Department, I sincerely apologize. This stop was unjustified. Your detention was unlawful. I'm formally notifying the U.S. Attorney's Office of this incident tonight. Williams's response was measured, precise, and devastating. Captain Morrison, I appreciate your apology. However, I'm documenting this incident for official complaint. I was stopped without probable cause, detained despite presenting federal law enforcement credentials, handcuffed in public view, and held for 15 minutes while my credentials sat unverified on a patrol car hood. This stop violated my Fourth Amendment rights. It violated department procedure, and it's part of a pattern for Officer Holden that your department has failed to address despite 14 prior complaints. I'll be filing a federal civil rights lawsuit. Every witness here has been recording. The dash camera captured everything. And I expect full cooperation from your department during discovery. Morrison nodded slowly. He had no defense to offer. Should officers with multiple sustained complaints be automatically terminated? Drop your answer. Within 4 hours, the videos were everywhere. A bystander's phone footage showed the entire stop. Williams presenting his credentials, Holden dismissing them, the backup units arriving, Williams handcuffed and placed in the patrol car. Another angle captured Morrison's arrival and his furious confrontation with Holden. The audio was clear. Every word was documented. Federal prosecutor handcuffed during traffic stop in Richmond. Officer on leave. DOJ attorney detained after presenting credentials. Richmond PD apologizes senior federal prosecutor arrested for driving while black. 15 minutes lawsuit filed. The outrage was immediate and overwhelming. The U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia issued a formal statement condemning the stop and announcing full cooperation with any civil rights investigation. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a preliminary inquiry. The Virginia NAACP demanded an independent review of the Richmond Police Department's complaint system. Legal defense organizations questioned how an officer with 14 complaints remained on patrol. Officer Travis Holden's life collapsed within days. Richmond PD placed him on administrative leave pending investigation. The Fraternal Order of Police reviewed the evidence and declined to contest the leave. Internal Affairs launched a comprehensive investigation into all 14 prior complaints. Holden released a brief statement through his attorney. I believed I was acting in accordance with my training and department procedures. I regret this incident. The statement convinced no one. The videos showed everything. A federal prosecutor, professionally dressed, calmly presenting credentials, complying fully, being arrested anyway. Marcus Williams retained Patterson and Chen, a civil rights litigation firm that specialized in federal excessive force and Fourth Amendment cases. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks after the stop. It named Officer Travis Holden, Captain Richard Morrison for supervisory failure, the Richmond Police Department, and the City of Richmond. The legal claims were comprehensive and devastating. Unlawful seizure and detention, without reasonable suspicion or probable cause in violation of the Fourth Amendment. False arrest and false imprisonment. Violation of 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 for deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Racial profiling and discrimination in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Excessive use of force. Unnecessary handcuffing with deliberately tight restraints causing physical injury. Intentional infliction of emotional distress through public humiliation and unlawful detention. Failure to train, supervise, and discipline officers with documented patterns of discriminatory policing. The complaint attached Officer Holden's complete disciplinary record, 14 complaints over 7 years, 9 involving racial profiling allegations, 4 sustained complaints, documentation of pattern targeting, black motorists in affluent neighborhoods, multiple recommendations for additional training that failed to change behavior. The city's attorneys reviewed the case file. The videos were indefensible. The credentials were legitimate. The stop had no legal justification. The witness testimony was consistent. The dash camera footage corroborated Williams's account. The Department of Justice was watching. Federal prosecutors had institutional resources to pursue litigation that would expose systemic failures. Richmond's legal team reached a conclusion: settle quickly, settle comprehensively, and implement reforms that might prevent the next viral incident. The settlement came 7 months after the traffic stop. Richmond agreed to pay $15 million to Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Williams. The settlement included additional terms: mandatory federal credential verification training for all Richmond PD officers, automatic federal notification for any detention of federal law enforcement personnel, independent review of all officer complaints by a civilian oversight board, immediate administrative leave for any officer receiving 5 or more complaints within 3 years, quarterly pattern analysis of traffic stops disaggregated by race with public reporting, annual civil rights training conducted by Department of Justice trainers, $15 million, the largest civil rights settlement in Richmond's history. Officer Travis Holden was terminated 6 weeks after the stop. The termination letter was final. Officer Holden conducted a traffic stop without reasonable suspicion. He detained a federal prosecutor after viewing legitimate Department of Justice credentials. He escalated to a felony traffic stop and handcuffed the victim without legal justification. This incident represents the culmination of a 7-year pattern of racially discriminatory policing documented in 14 complaints, 9 involving allegations of targeting black motorists. Despite multiple sustained complaints and mandatory training interventions, Officer Holden continued to engage in conduct that violates constitutional rights, department policy, and community trust. His employment is terminated effective immediately with no right to appeal. Holden's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His law enforcement career ended at 34 years old. He would never work as a police officer again in any jurisdiction. The Richmond Police Union initially filed a grievance challenging the termination. After reviewing the evidence, the videos, the credentials, the witness statements, the complaint history, they withdrew it. There was no defense. The pattern was too clear. The violation was too obvious. Holden released a second statement. "I made errors in judgment that I deeply regret. I accept responsibility for my actions. But apologies don't undo 15 minutes of handcuffs. They don't erase the humiliation of being arrested in front of your neighbors for driving your own car. Should officers face federal prosecution for civil rights violations in cases involving false arrest? Let me know in the comments." Marcus Williams testified before the Richmond City Council during a public hearing on police reform. The chamber was packed. Local media covered it live. His testimony was calm, factual, and devastating. My name is Marcus Williams. I'm an Assistant U.S. Attorney with 19 years of federal prosecution experience. I've put criminals in prison. I've argued before federal appellate courts. I've been recognized by the Attorney General for distinguished service. And on September 28th, I was handcuffed and detained on Monument Avenue for driving while black. He paused, letting the words settle. I was driving home from work. I signaled every turn. I obeyed every traffic law. I committed no violation. But Officer Holden saw a black man in a Mercedes and decided that was suspicious. When I showed him my Department of Justice credentials that represent 19 years of federal service, he dismissed them without verification and called for backup as if I were a violent felon. Another pause. Officer Holden had 14 complaints before he stopped me. 14. 9 of them involving racial profiling. 4 of them sustained. Your department knew he targeted black motorists in white neighborhoods. You documented it. You trained him. You suspended him. And you put him right back on patrol. His voice strengthened. The city is paying $15 million. That's accountability. Officer Holden is fired. That's consequences. But money and terminations don't undo what happened. They don't change the fact that I was handcuffed in front of my neighbors. They don't erase the message that even a federal badge isn't enough protection when an officer has decided you don't belong. He looked directly at the council members. If this can happen to me, with my credentials, my resources, my knowledge of the law, what happens to everyone else? What happens to the black teenager stopped for driving his parents' car? What happens to the black family pulled over in the Fan District? What happens to ordinary people who don't have federal badges and litigation resources? The chamber was silent. The real question isn't whether Officer Holden should have been fired. The question is why it took 14 complaints and a federal lawsuit to fire him. The question is why your complaint system treats each incident as isolated, rather than recognizing patterns. The question is, what changes now? The testimony ended. No one moved. The power came not from anger, but from the impossible reality. A senior federal prosecutor, handcuffed for presenting his badge. Should departments face federal oversight after failing to discipline officers with documented patterns of misconduct? Drop your answer. This wasn't just about one traffic stop. This was about a system that documented Travis Holden's pattern for 7 years and did nothing to stop it. 14 complaints, 9 involving racial profiling, 4 sustained with findings that Holden had violated policy. The documentation was comprehensive. The pattern was undeniable. But Richmond PD treated each complaint in isolation, implementing training that Holden attended but never internalized, imposing suspensions that interrupted his paychecks, but not his patrol assignment. The system preserved Holden's career while exposing the community to escalating violations. Each complaint was filed away. Each training certificate was signed. Each time he returned to Monument Avenue, the same neighborhood where his pattern emerged, targeting the same demographic that appeared in every sustained complaint. Officer Holden's career is over. That's justice. The city paid $15 million. That's accountability. His name is in the National Decertification Index. That's consequence. But the money doesn't undo Marcus Williams being handcuffed on Monument Avenue in front of witnesses who watched a federal prosecutor treated like a criminal. The termination doesn't restore the dignity of being detained while your credentials sit ignored on a patrol car hood. The settlement doesn't erase the message. Even with a Department of Justice badge, you can still be stopped for driving the wrong car in the wrong neighborhood. The real question is, what changes now? Do departments finally remove officers after sustained complaint number 4 instead of number 14? Do supervisors finally connect patterns instead of treating each violation as isolated? Do we finally acknowledge that expensive car plus black driver does not equal probable cause? Because if we don't fix the complaint systems that kept Holden on patrol despite documented violations, if we don't address the supervision failures that ignored 9 racial profiling allegations, if we don't recognize that bias in a uniform has the power to arrest, then we're just waiting for the next traffic stop, the next federal prosecutor, the next $15 million settlement, the next viral video. Comment if you believe this should be law. Officers with 3 or more sustained complaints involving racial profiling or civil rights violations face automatic termination and entry into the National Decertification Index. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with pressure and change starts with exposure, then hit that subscribe button. We're not stopping. We're going to keep documenting these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for the federal prosecutors, the ordinary motorists, the families who deserve to drive home from work without being treated as suspects. This isn't just about one officer or one prosecutor. It's about all of us and the system we're willing to accept.